William Lane Craig is not the Lucasian Chair of Mathematics at Cambridge. You know who is? Well, actually, as of 2009, it's Michael Green. But just before that, it was Stephen Hawking. The Lucasian Chair is one of the most prestigious academic appointments in the world. So when William Lane Craig chose to critique Hawking's latest book, where do you think the smart money lies? With the guy who for 30 years held the same position that Isaac Newton did? Or with a hack who works at a school that requires all faculty, staff, and students to accept Jesus Christ as their savior? I'd tell you to place your bets, but frankly... So, I just watched the discussion between William Lane Craig and Greg Koukl, and I don't recommend it. It's 45 minutes of your life that you'll never get back. I only watched it because Theo Warner showed a clip from it in his most recent video, and in that short clip, Craig perpetrated such flagrant dishonesty that I had to critique it, and I felt that in order to do so properly, I actually had to watch the whole thing. In the interview, Craig and Koukl give a critical review of Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mlodinow's book, The Grand Design. Now, to completely take apart all the crap in this interview would take me way too long. Craig totally misrepresents the free will determinism debate. He inaccurately claims that Hawking hasn't added any new science since A Brief History of Time, and he just strawmans the shit out of his opponents. Now, for me to critique Craig on the subject of this book is kind of unfair because I have an advantage that Craig apparently doesn't have. I've actually read The Grand Design. I'm pretty sure that Craig hasn't, or at the very least he's only read parts of it. That, to me, is the most charitable way of understanding how Craig could misrepresent the ideas in this book so blatantly. The alternative, of course, is that Craig is just plain lying about it. And actually, I think he's done precisely that in at least some parts. But I wouldn't put it past him in general, but I'll try to give him the benefit of the doubt wherever I can. So what exactly does Craig get wrong? Like I said, I don't have time to hit on everything, so I just want to focus on a couple of principal issues. First, he repeatedly calls Hawking an anti-realist about science.
The first third of this book is devoted to a purely philosophical discussion of anti-realism about the world. This wild anti-realism of Hawking and Mlodinow that we spoke of near the beginning of our interview.
Yeah.
Bullshit! Bullshit! Bullshit, 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 bullshit! Bullshit!
Now, in case you don't know what an anti-realist is, the basic idea is that science doesn't describe an objective, mind-independent reality, but instead simply provides useful tools for navigating the world. It's a controversial, but rationally defensible view of science. And it's a view that William Lane Craig clearly does not understand. And it's a point I'll return to in a moment. But perhaps the most baffling thing about this is that Hawking explicitly rejects anti-realism about science. He has a fairly extended discussion of it, in fact. Hawking's position is called model-dependent realism, a phrase that is used nearly a dozen times in the book. The basic idea behind model-dependent realism is the idea that there is no single theory of everything that can account for and explain all of nature. Rather, the best we can hope for is a series of consistent, overlapping models that collectively account for everything, but which cannot be reduced to a single common denominator. Hawking explicitly invokes model-dependent realism to avoid the protracted and, in his view, fruitless debate between realists and anti-realists about science. Now, in fairness to Craig, it could be argued that model-dependent realism collapses back into anti-realism, as there are certain similarities between the two positions. But such a claim would require an argument, something that Craig doesn't even seem to recognize, much less provide. So, Craig mischaracterizes Hawking's position in a flagrantly dishonest way. And that makes me wonder, did Craig think that, like him, no one else would actually read this book? Did he honestly believe that he could attribute to Hawking a view that he explicitly rejects and no one would call bullshit on him? Is he so full of himself that he thinks no one will fact-check him on this shit? But it actually gets worse. In order to make the point he wants to make, William Lane Craig has resorted to a time-honored technique in theology. Just making shit up.
So they actually say, get this, at one point in the book, that there is no objective fact of the matter whether the young Earth creationist is right or the Big Bang cosmologist is right. Young Earth creationism and Big Bang cosmology are equally valid models of reality, and it's meaningless to say which one describes the way the world really is because it's just model dependent, and all we can say is that the Big Bang is a more convenient model than young Earth creationism.
Bullshit, 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 bullshit.
Bullshit. 100% pure, stone cold bullshit. Hawking says no such thing in this book. Nothing even remotely close. The only place Hawking makes such a claim is in the William Lane Craig rectal suppository. That is, Craig just pulled that out of his ass. If Craig's claim didn't trigger your bullshit meter, you really need to have that thing checked. Do you really think that one of the most foremost scientists in the world would claim young Earth creationism is on equal footing with Big Bang cosmology? You don't even have to read his book to fact check this. Just go to the Amazon.com page for The Grand Design and click on the Search in This Book link. You'll find that neither the words young Earth nor the word creationism show up anywhere in this book. At all. Not once. That level of mendacity is worthy of a golden crocoduck.
So they actually say, get this, at one point in the book, that there is no objective fact of the matter whether the young Earth creationist is right or the Big Bang cosmologist is right. Young Earth creationism and Big Bang cosmology are equally valid models of reality, and it's meaningless to say which one describes the way the world really is because it's just model dependent, and all we can say is that the Big Bang is a more convenient model than young Earth creationism.
Do you need any more proof that William Lane Craig is a bald-faced liar? And to make matters worse, the claim that young Earth creationism is on equal footing with Big Bang cosmology isn't even true of anti-realism. Even if Hawking was what Craig claims he is, it would still be bullshit. Anti-realism doesn't just mean that you can believe whatever the hell you damn well please. Even anti-realists are constrained by the evidence. Of course, your scientific paradigm will color the way you view your evidence, but no paradigm can remain intact when the gross preponderance of evidence runs contrary to it, as is so clearly the case in young Earth creationism. When that happens, positions like young Earth creationism are ruled off the list of epistemically acceptable options. You don't need to be a realist to hold that obviously correct view. Just to pile more dirt on Craig's grave, check this out. Earlier in the interview, Craig actually makes the case for model-dependent realism. Have a listen.
And I think what the layperson needs to understand is that although the mathematical core of quantum physics, that is to say subatomic physics, the mathematical equations are highly confirmed, well established, but there are at least 10 different physical interpretations of what those equations mean, and nobody knows which of those interpretations is correct. And Hawking and Mlodinow never mention this fact. They just pick one of those interpretations and run with it. But the physical interpretation is, as you say, so obscure that someone like Richard Feynman said nobody really understands quantum physics.
Yeah.
And Hawking and Mlodinow never mention this fact, never mention this fact, never mention this fact, never mention this fact.
Bullshit! 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 Bullshit!
Let me just give an example of this. In quantum mechanics, there is an element of indeterminacy, that is to say, unpredictability. And one of the major interpretive disputes is, does this mean that reality itself is indeterminate, that reality itself behaves in non-deterministic ways? One physical interpretation would be that indeterminacy is ontic. Another one would be, no, reality is deterministic, but the indeterminacy is epistemic. And as I say, these are all empirically equivalent. You can't decide among those three based on scientific considerations.
In other words,
Now, first off, it's certainly true that there is a lot of disagreement over how to interpret quantum mechanics. But as I've said before, the dominant interpretation of quantum mechanics is the Copenhagen interpretation, which does say there is no fact of the matter as to which specific state an unobserved quantum particle is in. Hawking seems to endorse the many worlds hypothesis of quantum mechanics, which says that there is actually many facts of the matter. Every possible state exists simultaneously in a set of parallel realities, and we just don't know which reality we're in until we look. There are other interpretations too. I don't know where Craig gets the specific number of 10, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But Craig's suggestion that each of those interpretations is just as good as the others is...
Bull, 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 bull. Shit, 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 shit.
The reasons why scientists prefer Copenhagen, or even the many worlds hypothesis, isn't simply a matter of arbitrary preference or taste. Some experiments favor certain interpretations over others, and other scientific values such as simplicity, explanatory value, fecundity, and so forth, these other values might favor one interpretation over the other. But all of the popular interpretations of quantum mechanics at least lean, if not lean strongly, in favor of the conclusion that quantum indeterminacy isn't simply epistemic, and it is in fact ontic, again, contrary to Craig's suggestion. But all of this is besides my main point, which is this. The existence of multiple models for quantum mechanics is precisely where model-dependent realism shines. If we cannot make a definitive interpretation of a given field of science based on evidence alone, then our competing models are considered to be empirically adequate. It is only in such limited context that Hawking thinks it makes no sense to speak of there being a reality independent of our models. So in other words, just minutes after mischaracterizing Hawking's position as absurd, Craig lays out a very strong illustration of the strengths of that very position. Fuck me. I will give Craig credit for one point, though. He calls out Hawking for making the claim at the beginning of the book that philosophy is dead. Craig rightly points out that this is a silly thing to say, since a large portion of Hawking's book is advocating for a very particular philosophical position, namely model-dependent realism. It also ignores the fact that science is, of course, a branch of philosophy. Newton, you will recall, did not use the label scientist, but rather natural philosopher. Don't get me wrong, science is an autonomous discipline, but you have to pay attention to your roots. But it seems pretty clear to me that Hawking was clearly being rhetorical when he said that. Just as Friedrich Nietzsche's claim that God is dead is not to be taken literally, neither should we take Hawking's claim that philosophy is dead literally. He was exaggerating for effect. It was a misstep, and it was a stupid thing to say, in my opinion. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe one of the most esteemed intellectuals in the world is so ignorant of the nature of philosophy that he doesn't realize that he's actually engaged in it. Perhaps. But when it comes down to giving a Lucasian professor of mathematics the benefit of the doubt, I'd say he's earned it. William Lane Craig, on the other hand, well, he's not the Lucasian professor of mathematics. He's a hack and a liar. And Christians everywhere should be ashamed that he presents himself as one of their foremost intellectuals.
Bullshit, 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 bullshit!
Is that all I'm ever gonna get from you guys? Bullshit? Oh, ask a silly question.